Taylor James. We're here at Flipside Farms in Bedminster, New Jersey. We're situated on 93 acres, of which 35 are tillable. We've got myself as a farm manager and 2 full-time apprentices, as well as a couple of part-timers to farm 8 acres of production this year. And all of our farming goes to mostly our CSA, and with a little bit of additional crops and veggies going to wholesale. Basil is one of the very exciting, fragrant, aromatic, attractive crops that you have in a CSA, and that also gives you the flexibility to try different varieties and to experiment with the types that grow best in your soil, as well as the varieties that your customers like. There's 2 options always to growing. It's either direct seeding or transplanting out in the field. In our case, we find that we have a little bit better luck with our transplants. And so what we do is we start those transplants right here in the greenhouse. And we use these flats, we fill them with organic soil, and we seed each of these cells 2 or 3 per cell. That gives us nice clumps of basil for when we're ready to transplant this out into the field. We seeded about 2.5 weeks ago, and you can see that we've seeded these about 2 or 3 per cell, and now they're starting to germinate and develop their second set of leaves, their first of the true leaves. And as you look over, this is very uniform. We have no mildews, no issues here, and it looks like great germination. And even at this early stage, you can tell the difference between the basil varieties. All green, smells incredible. Yeah. After the basil germinates in our greenhouse, it's usually in our greenhouse after it germinates for about 2 weeks before we are about ready to plant. And so, as I've got in front of me, we got a full flat of Genovese basil ready to go into the field. For us, we know that they're ready to go when the root ball pulls out of that cell. It's nice, and you can see the root hairs. It's full and it's easy to, again, pluck right out of the cell. So we take these flats and we load up the truck and the tractor. We drive them out to the field, and then the transplanting fun begins. All right, so what we have on the back of this tractor is a chisel plow. Now, the chisel plow is very versatile, especially for us at Flipside Farm, and especially for our basil production. So the first thing that we use the chisel plow for is for our primary tillage. And so what this thing does is with the shanks arranged, we drag this through a field and pretty much subsoil and rip furrows to the ground to loosen up the soil in order for us to rotivate it and make it a nice, smooth, tilthy bed. The next thing we use this chisel plow for is to cut the 2 furrows in our beds so that we can transplant our basil into those furrows. And then lastly, the third thing that we do is, as we have it set up right now, we have the shanks arranged so that we can use this as a mechanical weeder, in a sense, a tine weeder, and drag these shanks through the field to eliminate weeds. So you'll notice that we have 3 shanks on this chisel plow now, and we have sort of marked out some of our spacings for the various different tasks that we are doing with this chisel plow, whether it be primary tillage, whether it be cutting furrows, or whether it be mechanically weeding. We come back through with our hose to get right up close to the plants to eliminate as much of that weed pressure as possible. That way we don't have to get down on our hands and knees to pick the individual little tiny weeds that are coming up in the basil.
Basil downy mildew was first found in the United States in Florida in the fall of 2007. Since that time, it's been found in every state in the continental United States, as well as Hawaii and Alaska, as well as most countries in Europe and Africa, wherever basil is grown. Downy mildew can cause 100% crop loss in a crop in any given season in the United States without proper control. Basil downy mildew was most likely introduced in the United States on infested seed that was brought in from another country. Downy mildew is an obligate pathogen, which means in our region of the country, it won't survive the winter. The only places in the United States where basil downy mildew would survive the winter would be in southern Florida and southern Texas, where there's no frost period. The only way basil downy mildew could be introduced onto your farm would be through infested seed, which you bought and purchased and planted yourself, or through natural weather patterns. If you find basil downy mildew in your crop early in the spring, it's most likely that the seed you planted was infested. In most summers, basil downy mildew will enter our region through natural weather patterns. This most likely can happen anytime from May, June, July, and onward. If I were to grow basil in our region organically, I would make sure I would produce basil only in the spring, before the pathogen enters our region. Leaf wetness, high relative humidity favor basil downy mildew development. So make sure you plant your basil in a sunny location where the leaves can dry out quickly. Rutgers has done a number of fungicide trials over the past 7 years, looking in ways to control basil downy mildew, either conventionally or organically. At most of your organic fungicides will only help to suppress the fungus. The easiest way to control weeds in sweet basil would be to plant your sweet basil crop on plastic mulch using transplant plugs with drip irrigation. Weeds can create microclimates which can be conducive to basil downy mildew development, so you want to control them. One of the interesting things about basil downy mildew and other downy mildews is that it will only sporulate on the bottom sides of leaves. If you find basil downy mildew in your crop, most likely 100% of the crop is already infected. So when you're scouting for basil downy mildew in your basil crop, make sure you look at the undersides of the leaves and look for purplish brown spores. Fusarium wilt is another important pathogen of basil. The fungus itself can survive in the soil for many years once it is found on your farm. The easiest, most economical way to control fusarium wilt is to make sure you rotate your basil crops season to season. One symptom of fusarium wilt in basil are small, studded plants. The fungus itself will clog up the vascular tissue of the plant, and those plants will wilt and die.
There's a couple of different ways to harvest basil. Really, it's up to you and your marketing and how you want to package it and sell it to your customers. One way is by simply just pinching off all of the leaves individually and storing them, say, in a clamshell or some container like that. Another way is the way that we often do it, or sometimes do it. You pluck just the side shoots off of the main stem of basil, right at the stem. What that does is gives you some basil that you can put in bunches, and then also allows the plant to keep growing if you want to save that basil for a later harvest. So the way that we're going to be cutting basil for the most part is we're going to clear cut our beds once the basil has reached maturity. So we'll cut those basil plants at about 2 or 3 inches above the ground, right at the stems, and bunch those together based on our size standard that we're using for that day. So a couple other things about our basil harvest. Basil is a tough herb to keep fresh for our customers. So what we like to do is we like to cut it the same morning that we're delivering it on our CSA table or at market or at wholesale. We find that it tends to hold up its quality best when we cut it the same day or the night before or the morning before. And we also cut our basil sort of in succession, so as we need it. We don't just clear cut a whole row and keep it in our cooler for a week or two before turning that around. So as fresh as you can cut the basil before your market, the better off it's going to taste and the better it's going to keep for your customers. So as we are in production, if we do see flowering heads start to appear on any of the basil, we take the time to pinch those off to allow the plant to put more energy into the quality of its leaves and fresh taste rather than going to seed.
My name is Jim Simon. I'm a professor in the Department of Plant Biology at Rutgers University. I've been at Rutgers since 2000, and I have been in love with basil. I've been basil obsessed since 1983. Sweet basil is one of the most cold sensitive or chilling sensitive culinary herbs that one could grow. All the other culinary herbs you could grow, you could pack them in a refrigerator and you won't see any damage. But sweet basil, for some reason, genetically, is just extremely sensitive to chilling or cold temperature. So if you put in a refrigerator, which could be at 3 to 5 degrees C, okay, or the temperature of your refrigerator, it's going to get these dark brown to black injured chlorotic areas within the leaves. And sweet basil is just genetically chilling sensitive. Thai basils, lemon basils, cinnamon basil, all the different exotic basils are also chilling sensitive. So you can't keep them and store them in the refrigerator. You have to be able to harvest them, clean them, package them, keep them in the shade. Some people find that by packaging basil and wrapping it up in burlap or wrapping it up in a package and keeping it in the dark prior to then putting it in a refrigerated truck or a truck that has cold temperature but not set as cold as the other culinary herbs and traditional vegetables, it'll be a little bit more tolerant or less susceptible to chilling injury. But as you see the sweet basil where it's marketed in the retail level, it's never put in a cold area. It's always marketed outside next to a cold area or placed next to a tomato or other things to which consumers associate basil would be, okay? There's new types of ways basil is marketed now in pots, live plants, or in cut bags that comes from hydroponic or aeroponic type of production rather than the more traditional style bunding. But chilling sensitivity is ubiquitous. People have a problem with it all over the world. It's not just an issue for you as an organic or a small grower. Large growers can't ship sweet basil in the same trucks that they would ship other types of herbs. And so they do these other types of management practices, preconditioning the plant with a little bit of water stress, preconditioning the plant under dark conditions, preconditioning the plant under elevated, colder conditions, but not as cold enough to induce a chilling injury. So with sweet basil, you just have to be really careful. Now, some people are trying to develop genetically chilling tolerant plants, and we at Rutgers, we have a team where we actually take 7,000 or 10,000 plants and put them in a cold room and then see if any of the plants come out with no damage 92 or 98 hours later, and we find. And so we've created populations that when it's a whole plant or a cut plant can go into cold temperatures and come out looking green and looking nice. The chilling tolerant, there's no chilling tolerant yet on the commercial marketplace. One hopes that through our work or through other plant breeders' work in other institutions or other seed companies that chilling tolerance would soon be available to growers. But for right now, keep your plants out of cold storage at that 4 degrees C. But if you elevate the temperature higher, which would still extend the shelf life, but not provide the type of long-term shelf life you would need for your other fresh market vegetables, then basil can fit in that. And you won't get the damage at higher, though refrigerated conditions, but you will get those damage at the traditional set refrigerated conditions.
My name is Mikey Azara. I have a company called Zone 7. We are an all local farm fresh distribution company, and we source from farms in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York, Connecticut, and Delaware. And we were founded in 2008, and now we're working with about 150 farms throughout the region. We source that product and we deliver it to restaurants, grocery stores, schools, and more. In terms of quality for basil, what we're really looking for first and foremost is freshness and vitality in the leaves. We don't want to see any wilting or limp leaves. And then once we pull it out, we're going to check for any sliminess down on the stems. And then for the leaves, we want to make sure there's no browning or blackening of the leaves, which is, largely due to any kind of cold temperatures. So in terms of what would make us receive or turn down a product, I brought a fresh case of basil for us to really walk through these steps. And so this is a case of basil. It's bunched, it's packed 15 bunches. And so I open it up and there is a wet cloth on top, and that's gonna keep it nice and fresh. That's not absolutely required, but it does help. When I pull out this bunch, you see on the top here, it's nice and green, fresh. There is no brown or blackening. And then I'm gonna pull it out and make sure, this band isn't too tight around it. If it was, there'd be a lot of bruising. And then, like I said, I'm gonna look for any browning or sliminess down here too, and there's none of that here. So this case would be received as good quality. We're probably gonna check, if there's 20, 50 cases, we're gonna check at least 4 of those cases to make sure that throughout, we're seeing good quality. In terms of basil, what's really cool is this item, there's still a lot of opportunity for basil. And so, what I have here is a 15 count or 15 bunch case. And so, for this, the farmer's gonna harvest, let's say about like 10 stems and bunch them together. This is one way to do it. Other options, if you're selling to a distributor or directly to a restaurant, by the pound, where it's mostly just the leaves, is another way to go. So you could sell it in like a 1 or a 2 pound increment. And then another really good option is to put it in some kind of plastic clamshell. And again, like the sky's the limit in terms of flexibility here. A lot of growers might pack like even just a 1 ounce clamshell, whereas other farms that we see are really innovating and they're determining what their pack size is. It might be 3.5 ounces, it might be 5 ounces, and they've got the nice farm label on there. And in terms of the packaging in a clamshell, it really holds up really well. The less contact with the air in a grocery store, the less wilting you're gonna see. And we find the buyers are more willing to buy more of that product. With this product, honestly, putting this out in a store, ShopRite, Whole Foods, whatever, they're actually pretty reluctant to purchase this because they see a lot of risk with it in terms of the product going bad quickly. In terms of value and cost for this product, it really depends on how it's packed. One way, if it's packed by the bunch, a lot of times the farmers are able to get, I'd say, at least $1 a bunch or up to $1.50, $1.75 a bunch. And that depends if you're selling it direct to a store or to a distributor. Distributors might have a little bit lower price. So in terms of by the bunch, it's definitely higher value than, say, growing a cilantro or a dill, which oftentimes is growing for or selling for only 50 cents a bunch or even less. Other options for packing, if you pack it by the pound and only harvest, let's say, the top leaves of this basil, then you can get an even higher premium, but you really need the labor force that's gonna harvest the leaves properly. When we see it sold by the pound, I would say that you could get as much as $6 to $8 a pound. And then, like I said, if you're packing it in some kind of retail clamshell, your price per pound can be quite high because you might sell a little package for $2, but it's only 3.5 ounces. In terms of pricing, to close, I would say that we encourage the farm to really look at the numbers and figure out a pack size that allows them to get the price they need to cover the cost of growing this product. In terms of labeling, like any crop that you're gonna grow, ideally it has the farm name on the side of the box, it has the lot number, things like that for tracking and food safety. Then it depends, is it a bunch of basil, in which case it just needs a rubber band, or is it a clamshell where you really want the farm name and the label on it. In terms of cold chain and shipping, this is one of the trickiest parts of producing basil and getting it to the customer in good quality. So since basil, like tomatoes, doesn't really like to be very cold, the most important thing is to maintain the temperature. And so let's just say the farm refrigerates it at 40 degrees. Then the distributor would want to maintain that 40 degrees and then get it to a customer that's going to maintain that 40 degrees, because what's going to cause that sliminess in the stem down here is a change in temperature and moisture. For the most part, what we recommend with basil is maintaining about 50 to 55 degrees. And so if it's gonna go on a refrigerated truck, having it be closed up and not have access to that cold air is a good step. But you can also insulate it. A lot of times when we're shipping tomatoes or basil, we might put some kind of insulation over those cases so that the rest of the truck is refrigerated at 35, but that basil is not exposed to those temperatures. If a grower is considering growing basil, we encourage them to try to line up the outlet for this product in advance. So if you want to contact us, we encourage you to contact us in the winter, and we can tell you if we have a need or demand for basil. Basil is the kind of item that we see demand for 52 weeks of the year. Just like tomatoes, we like to have it on the list for the entirety of the year. So whether we're sourcing it from the field or the greenhouse, we always have it. We see consistent demand. For example, we sell a lot of basil around Christmas, and not many growers have it in the field. So at that time, we're pulling it from the greenhouse. So 52 weeks of the year, there is a strong demand for your sweet Italian basil.